Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
In the marriage ceremony itself, I was talking about alcohol, the view of wine. Judaism, biblical Judaism, looks at wine. Well, how do you think the Old Testament, what do you think the Old Testament view of wine is? Not a trick question. I know you've read, you're here Emmaus, so you've read portions of the Old Testament, and you've read the word wine. Does the Bible condemn it? Does the Bible accept it? Take a guess. It's just a common drink. Okay?
It's not forbidden, but you're told not to become drunk.
Okay. So it's it's common drink. You're not to become abusive of it. Okay? Anything else? Yeah. Okay, so there's certain, yes? It's medicinal. Okay. I challenge you to read the book of Psalms, particularly, and you will find that wine, and also Song of Solomon as well, wine is used as a drink of joy. Okay? Drink of joy. Now, abuse? Absolutely. The Bible forbids abuse. I'm talking Old Testament here. By the way, we could go to the New Testament. Just so you know, especially on tape, I don't drink. I did in Judaism when I was as an Orthodox Jewish person. Passover, Rosh Hashanah, I don't drink, but I choose not to drink, not because I think it's condemned in the Bible, because I don't think it's condemned in the Bible. I choose not to drink because it can cause somebody else to stumble. And that's the reason. In Judaism, drinking is a symbol of joy. So for Rosh Hashanah, for tabernacles, for a wedding, for a bar mitzvah, there is the wine and the bread. At Shabbat, always there's wine. So alcohol, wine, if you will, is a drink of celebration, but Judaism condemns abuse of it, condemns it, just as the New Testament does as well. And so there's great debate amongst Christians. There's some people who say that a wine in the New Testament was not alcohol. I'm not here to discuss whether it was, whether it wasn't, whatever. I am here to say that in the Old Testament, there's no question that wine was wine. It's alcohol. But abuse, not good. Drinking to celebrate, absolutely. The fruit of the vine is a very important part of the culture of Judaism. Very much a part. So at any wedding, there's going to be wine. At any Passover, wine. At any bar mitzvah, there will be wine. Abuse, highly condemned. Now, just to give you an idea of culture again, while it is absolutely true that Jewish people, as individuals, have abused alcohol, that is, they get drunk, just like everybody else. But it is also true that as a group, the incidence of alcoholism always is lower amongst Jewish people than it is amongst Gentile people. That's just the way it is. Why? There's a respect for wine in proper context, but abuse is simply frowned upon. So while I tell you, when I was growing up, even when I was little, when we had Passover and you're supposed to take a sip of wine, I hated it. We had Manischewitz wine. I didn't even like it. But it's part of what you do, and it's pretty much accepted. So drinking of the wine, reciting 7 blessings, the bride circles her groom. Breaking of the wine glass is a couple of reasons that's done. Number one, it reminds, it's a fresh remembrance of the temple that was destroyed, number one. Number two, as the groom is there, knowing that this is his wedding day, I think it's safe to say for most grooms they've got one thing on their mind, and that's the honeymoon. And so for a split second, the idea of breaking the glass is a pause, kind of an abrupt pause to remember that as joyous and as wonderful and as anticipating as he is, particularly for this whole wedding and to consummate the marriage. Remember this, the rabbis would say, that marriage isn't always going to be a party. Marriage isn't always going to be this wonderful thing. So it's a split-second pause to kind of just take stock of the situation. So, by the way, the word mazel tov, I'll go back there. Mazel tov. That's a Yiddish expression. It means good luck. Another thing about the Jewish people, again, this is a general statement. There's all kinds of exceptions. But generally speaking, Jewish people are superstitious. They are a superstitious people. Not to the point where they're, where they believe they black cats and walking under ladders and that kind of thing. But there is this idea of the evil eye, of if bad things happen in a certain pattern, Jewish people tend to be superstitious. Thus, the expression mazel tov literally means good luck. It's an expression. It means good luck. May good come. But technically, it does have luck in the ceremony. So you know. Family. Jewish family is big, very important. Jewish families are close. Again, I'm making general distinctions here. There are exceptions all the time. Jewish people usually have a lower rate of divorce than other groups, although it's on the rise like it is for everybody else. But still, strong families. By the time my father passed away, they were married 62 years. Very good example of what a loving relationship is. That's, as a baby boomer, I would tell you that people my age have probably, as a group, gone through all kinds of divorces. And yet, the parents, our parents, strong marriages. And those baby boomer parents usually came from strong, traditional Jewish families. They'd probably be the children of the Tevias of the world. When you watch Fiddler on the Roof, when they came in the late 1800s, early 1900s, then that would be my grandparents' age. And then when they came to this country, those people get married. Their marriages tended to be very strong, very committed, because they were raised in a strong, traditional Jewish home. The more liberal you become, this is to me just an observation, the more liberal you become religiously, whatever your religion is, the more in danger your marriage will be. It's not a hard and fast rule. But it seems to be the case. And I'm not even talking about Bible-believing, born-again Christians. I'm strictly saying strong religious homes tend to have strong marriages, strong families as well. Less religious homes tend to have weaker families. So, And he might differ from me on that. That's my opinion as my observation. Anybody? Okay, so you're with me, or you just don't want to say. Okay. And there's the statement right there. So, in Judaism, it's really important to show respect within the family. There are defined roles in the family. They are defined. Father, mother, children. Defined roles. Even the more orthodox they are, even male and female have defined roles. And the more orthodox or observant they are, the more accepting they are of those roles. But that doesn't mean, regardless of the role that you play, that doesn't mean that disrespect is shown. Again, in an observant family, yes, the woman doesn't do several religious things, liturgy or things at the synagogue, but that doesn't mean that the woman is a non-respected person in the family. Quite the contrary. Usually, the woman in an observant home is highly esteemed because she asserts a certain amount of control because of the defined role she plays. So, in an Orthodox home, the mother, again, I'll use Fiddler on the Roof because most of you have seen it. Tevye's wife. I mean, her husband is the one that makes all these decisions, but it's kind of humorous. She gets what she wants anyway and does it within the defined role that she has. In Judaism, the mother is the big cheese. In spite of what anybody else says, usually it is the wife, the mother. Her domain is the house, the children, and she's the one that makes things happen. That's usually the way it is. The purpose of the family, or the idea of the family, is to have a strong family, a happy family, a joyous family, glad to be together. It's one of the things that happens in an observant home, for instance, that follows this, again, in an Orthodox setting. In an Orthodox setting, one thing is for sure, regardless of the age of the children in that household, and that is this. Every Friday night and Saturday, the whole family's together. Even in a Western mindset. Most of you understand what it is with your cell phones, with computers, with different schedules, whether it's baseball practice, basketball practice, football practice, music lessons, ballet lessons, whatever it is going on in your family where you're rushed here and rushed there. Those same things happen in Jewish homes except for this, that for sure, in an Orthodox setting, one day a week, there's no TV turned on, no cell phone is turned on, no opportunity to go to somebody else's house to spend the night. There is that one day that is the family worships together, eat together. When I was growing up, Friday night, no matter what, we had to be home. We ate till I went off to college. We had, for sure, one meal a night that we all ate together, and that was on Friday night. Guaranteed. It was part of our culture. And so, but that was, well, I can't tell you it was always harmonious, but generally speaking, it was expected, it happened, and I can tell you as a result of that kind of thinking, the family stayed close. Even when I made a decision to receive Christ, as bad as it was, the family still overcame that problem because of the strength of the relationship. And I would tell you that that's one of the reasons. There was a strong desire to maintain good relations together and to accept the different roles within the family. Children. Marriage in Judaism is not only for children, that is to have children, but it is a major part. Thus, if a couple cannot have children, while that is not a stigma in a negative sense or people would get angry, it's a major problem. I think it is in other cultures as well. That's not unique to Judaism. But the emphasis of children, if that can't happen, it's a painful reality. Yes, question. Yes, Jewish people are very open to adoption. Again, exceptions as individuals, like it is anywhere else. Some individuals, not because of Judaism in any way, just because of their personality or whatever, there's difficulty in accepting adoption. And so couples have the same issues that any other couples would have when faced with that kind of dilemma. But as a general rule, Judaism is very receptive. And in fact, the desire to have children within marriage is so strong in Judaism that adoption is a wonderful thing. So as a rule, not a problem. Individuals, some of them might have it. But there's nothing in Judaism that would prevent that from happening. So, Orthodox Judaism, again, the idea of commands, mitzvot, plural, mitzvah, singular. Getting pregnant on Shabbat is a double mitzvah. So, very important. So just as I said that it's important that families be together on Shabbat, they do worship together, they eat supper together. Again, this is the more observant families. Pretty much you can count on husbands and wife coming together on Shabbat as well. Because if they're motivated, certainly they love each other, but they're motivated to please God, to follow the commandments. That's a tradition within Judaism. So children are important, following the commands are important, and that's a part of it. When that happens, the idea is because we are assisting God by propagating humanity. And so there's this desire to work with God, if you will, on following the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. Now, sex within marriage. This is contrasted with other views, religious views. For instance, in Catholicism, there's the whole idea of the purpose of marriage is to have children, which the old strict Catholic view is that it's a necessary thing, but that's as far as it goes. You have children. If you're going to come together, it's for the purpose of having children. Judaism looks at that mentality, or at least the reputation that some within Catholicism have, and frown upon that. Judaism is an expression. Remember in the film, the jewelry that came out, that they brought it out, and it had the Hebrew letters Chai, means life. Judaism is an expression of living, of life, of enjoying life. In fact, oftentimes, when a Jewish person encounters a believer, one of the things that usually comes up is something like this. You people always talk about dying and death. For instance, one of the lines in Christianity oftentimes, if you were to die today, have you ever used that before or heard somebody? If you were to die today, where would you go? Or what would you say to God? Or what would He say to you? Now think about that. I've heard Jewish people say, man, I heard somebody say that to a 12-year-old child. If you were to die today, he's 12 years old. What kind of people think about a 12-year-old person dying? They look at that whole kind of mentality and say, this is awful. 12 years old, he should be thinking about, or she should be thinking about going swimming and playing baseball Going to the store, to the mall and shop. Judaism doesn't talk about if you were to die today. It's a clash of perspectives. And so Judaism, or Jewish people, oftentimes look at, quote, Christians as, oh, they think coming together as a couple is a bad thing. You got to have kids, and if you're not going to have kids, then, after you're 45 years old, that's it. Judaism doesn't think that way. They celebrate life. And so sex within marriage is encouraged. It's a blessing. It's a joy. And whether you have children or not is not the issue. And so within Judaism, again, it's this perception of one culture looking at another culture. So it's not only for procreation. Again, getting back to the foundation, respect for one another, understanding roles, and understanding love. So within Judaism, the idea of denying the other person pleasure is frowned upon. Now remember, within the confines of observant Judaism, a couple is apart at least 2 weeks out of every month. That's not considered denying your partner if the woman is in a state of impurity. The context here is assuming all things are equal. By the way, that both parties are healthy and all that. But the context is, again, encouraging a happy, joyous, fulfilled family, and also looking at the love in the marriage as expressed should not be denied. You should be able to express yourself, and because you love the other person, be willing to give yourself over to the other person and not deny them. Any questions on that? Okay. Very important. This is, again, we live in a culture today. I'm talking about our culture in the United States. We live in a culture today where abuse, spousal abuse, I don't know the statistics. I know this. We're hearing about it more than ever. As to whether it's happening more, I realize we live in a much more open society. We're hearing about it a lot. Judaism frowns upon that. It is such an outrage to think about, for instance, a man hitting a woman beyond comprehension within Judaism. I happen to be raised with two sisters, an older sister and a younger sister, right in the middle. And I can remember if either one of them cried, they were shouting, screaming, and the girl was crying, I got whacked. I just got whacked. Why? I'm the guy. If I'm anywhere near, honestly, one time I got in trouble. I didn't even know I was in trouble. My mother was mad at me because I wasn't even in the house. My sister had an issue, was crying, and my mother knew it was me. But it wasn't me. I wasn't even home. My point is, within Jewish culture, the idea of abuse of drink and then going to your wife, the idea of being angry and then from that anger to go to your wife is just a horrible. Again, this does not mean that Jewish people are not prosecuted for that. Doesn't mean that it never happens to Jewish people. I'm just saying that it is an anathema amongst Jewish people when it does. It's just an outrage. And yet the Bible talks about certainly fulfilling your marriage vows, but never in this context. Never. And notice the woman's state goes along any of those other ones. And look, I'm not here to embarrass people, but you think in terms of why would God do something like that in terms of the cycle? Why is there such an emphasis on that? Again, I told you, I happen to be raised with women. I had my father, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and 2 sisters living in the house, okay? And we only had 1 bathroom. So I can tell you stories. But I do know this, that things happen within the female body during this time that they have pills for today. You go to the drugstore to get, because stuff happens. Isn't it interesting that God put in the law? We're not under the law, we're under grace. But isn't it interesting, as you read the Scriptures, you find that God sets out a standard by which leave them alone during this time. There's a profound respect, I believe, sincerely, a profound respect by God for His created beings and an understanding heart that stuff happens during this time, and the man is told, lay off, stay away. This isn't the time. It does prevent problems that happen to people who don't follow these rules otherwise. That's all I'm saying. The church is not under obligation to follow these rules, but I think it is helpful as we read the text to say, hey, wait, this is another example of the law is holy, just, and good. God respects women, and He upholds them much higher than what we do here on earth. And I think, again, not to make a big deal about it, but I think it's worth mentioning and talking about, because in Judaism, if they follow the law, a lot of the issues that are difficulties in other marriages aren't so much in Jewish homes. So, I think we mentioned this already, the I Love Lucy beds. You know, Ricky and Lucy, they go to bed, they got the table in the middle. That's the way it is for ultra-Orthodox. That makes sure that the woman is protected during that time, that temptation won't overcome them. So affecting, these would be some of the advantages of following that particular law. Now the mikveh kind of looks like a swimming pool there. It's not a swimming pool. It has to have live water. Now what does that mean, live water? The water has to be, it could be rainwater is usually what's used, and it's got to be moving. So the mikveh is just a ceremonial bath. The woman doesn't take a bath. There's no soap in the mikveh. Usually when you go to a mikveh, there are showers that the woman does use first with soap and takes her shower first and goes into the mikveh. Sometimes with a white cloth on them. Now, there's a problem here. It's not a problem, but a situation. The rabbi must give a blessing during this time. This is in an Orthodox setting. So the question is, wait a minute. How does the rabbi give a blessing when a woman must go into this mikveh and she's got to go with no clothes on? Well, there's a place on the side where the rabbi is, and the person announces they're here. He doesn't see anything, knows she's in. He recites the blessing, and the woman goes in. It's always on the up and up. But again, and this would only be a situation for very observant people, which are a minority. I underscore that continually. So it's symbolic purification. It coincides with New Testament thinking, which is still Jewish thinking. John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, baptism unto repentance. They weren't taking a bath. They weren't using ivory. They were going into the Jordan, if you will, as a symbol. So is the mikveh. it's a symbol of purification. The idea of being separated, discipline, cleansing of the heart, mind, and emotions, and each month then presented to her husband. Parenting, discipline. Even amongst Christians today, there's debate about discipline and how to do it, how often to do it, and what to do when it happens. Judaism is no different. But there are guidelines within Judaism. And certainly the main one is the idea of being vicious, cruel, acting on temper, not the way to do it. By the way, that's, again, not unique to Judaism, but Judaism has fallen in line with this kind of thinking from the days of the Bible. Probably they're less physical than they probably were longer ago, but nonetheless, the idea of discipline, it should never be done in anger, never vicious. Loving children. That's, as a rule, Jewish people are known for expressing their love to their kids, if not even spoiling their kids. But certainly loving children, very, very important. There's a strong desire amongst observant Jewish people to train their children in Judaism, in knowledge of the Torah, in knowledge of the law. Strong desire to do that. There's a tradition within Judaism amongst Orthodox Jews that when a child is 2 or 3 years old, to place him by a book, an older book, or not necessarily an older book, but a book that they might not need again, and they'll pour honey on it. They pour honey onto the book, on its pages. Sometimes we'll, put them all over. What will the child do if it sees honey or smells it and sees it? What's he going to do? I can't hear you. Lick it. He's going to want. She is going to want to eat it. That's what they want. The pages of the book are communicating that this is sweet. Books, Torah, learning, sweet, good, wonderful. There's always been a tradition within Judaism to train the children young. I noticed you laughed yesterday, and it is kind of abrupt. I remember when we wrote the script. I said 2 important things for a Jewish parent, and one of them was to teach them to swim, and if you remember. Well, what's that all about? There is actually logic behind it. What happens if a person is on a boat and there's trouble? If you don't know how to swim, you'll die. So actually, 2 things required. Number 1, they need to learn a trade. They need to be able to survive economically. So that's number 1. And 2 is swim, which seems crazy, but it's consistent. By teaching your child to swim, and most Jewish families, they might not even know that it's a requirement. It's been a tradition for a long time. But Jewish people, I've met very few Jewish people who don't know how to swim, really. And it's an important thing to help save your life. It's a tradition. It's not, most people don't know it, but I find it interesting that, number 1, to survive economically, you need to know a trade. To survive physically, if you're ever in danger, you fall off out in a boat or you're in water, you know how to swim. Very important. So it's consistent, at least, with the goals of parenting, taking care of your kids. Proverbs 22 says, and this has to do with the idea of children and the name. I was asked about my parents when I became a believer. The idea of training up a child is very important. The name. We were talking before when people were asking me about my parents and when I became a believer and all the things involved. The number 1 issue is shame on the family. Hurting the name is a terrible offense within Judaism. You might hear comedians, there's a lot of Jewish comedians, and one of them, I forgot who it is, but I heard this line, the Jewish people invented guilt. The Jewish mother and the idea of guilt, it's a biggie within Judaism. And so the whole idea of how you can manage your family, the Jewish mother's often known as a person who uses guilt. Oh, you're stabbing me in the heart. Why don't you just kill me now? I mean, all these expressions that are used to emphasize that we don't want to shame our name. That's a big deal within Judaism. The name, the integrity of the name, the family's standing in the community, there's a strong desire to keep that pure. And so anything to tarnish that is looked down upon. Okay? Any questions? Okay. Okay, we talked about Deuteronomy 6 and the Shema. That's a mezuzah. When you walk into a house, a Jewish house, you'll see the mezuzah right over here. Jewish people are unashamed of identifying themselves publicly. That's an important thing. We are a persecuted people. Wherever country we've been in for a while, things go well, but eventually, it's our history that eventually being Jewish is a very dangerous thing, even life-threatening. Yet, contained within Judaism is the command to let everybody in the neighborhood know that a Jew lives here. And so I can no matter where you live, including in Iowa, doesn't matter where you live, if a Jewish person moves into the neighborhood and they're observant, key ingredient, but most Jewish people will do it, one of the first things they do is plant their mezuzah on the doorpost. So you can walk down the street, and I've taken groups to show them in Jewish neighborhoods. You can walk down the street and look, and you can see the mezuzahs. Any of you ever seen a mezuzah, been in a Jewish home? Okay. Okay, there you go. Have one on your door. So Deuteronomy chapter 6 says, we shall bind it for a sign upon our hand. They shall be as frontlets between our eyes. But it also says, you shall put it on the lintels of your doors. So when you walk in on the gate, when you walk in the door, Jewish person will touch it and kiss their hand. Or do it, kiss their hand and then touch it. I've seen both. But the point is, that's God's word. The box is the thing we see, but within that box are the scripture verses, handwritten by a scribe, and it talks about the love of God. We're to love Him with all our heart, soul, and mind. So there's Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Now, when the shoe's on the other foot, per se, as we think of parents and children, parents love their children, they raise them and provide for them. What happens when a parent gets old? Now it changes. The responsibility of the children with their parents. Now, a lot of these issues that I'm raising are issues that happen in our society. Look, everybody gets old. Parents raise their kids. Eventually, things happen. If you live long enough, the kids are going to have to take care of the parents, one way or the other. Those are all issues. Within Judaism, it is considered, well, first, it's most of the time it's considered an honor, but certainly a responsibility on the part of the children to take care of their parents later on in life. Is that 100% true? No, there's all kinds of issues that arise. Do they always do it? No. One of the things that happens within Judaism historically has been the number of Jewish nursing homes that have sprung up, and there are a number of them. Because what used to happen is parents would move in with their children. That would be a long time ago. But that has changed over the years, so now the responsibility usually is that the children will make sure that their parents are taken care of, but not necessarily in their house. And they use, and by the way, again, not unique to just to Jewish people, that's lots of people. So Judaism teaches that the children are responsible and should lovingly take care of their parents if they need to. They're to be honored. Children are to honor their parents. And Judaism has historically been well known as folks who live up to that. As a general rule, Jewish people have a good reputation in making sure that they honor their parents. Education, big in Judaism. Whereas observant Jews and in days of old, biblical days, the purpose of being literate, and Jewish people have historically always been a literate people, the purpose was religious. My grandfather was a tailor. When you have Fiddler on the Roof and we think about Eastern Europe, there was the butcher, the tailor. They were trades, working trades that they were to do to support themselves, but they would all be literate. Why? Because of reading the Scripture, studying, reading what the rabbis have to say. Judaism has always been concerned with learning. As Jewish people became less religious, and they have historically, there's never been a diminishing in terms of the emphasis of learning. The topics have changed. So the idea of learning the Bible, learning what the rabbis teach. Remember, the rabbi showed us his library and how important books were, he said, from a rabbinical point of view for rabbis. The same would be true, books would be in many Jewish homes, whether they were rabbis or not, simply because of the joy of learning. But as we become more liberal religiously, the emphasis is still on education, but now it's on education for the purpose of getting a profession, a job. It carries on the idea of, instead of teaching a child a trade and swimming, we send them to college and learn to swim. Okay? So when I was in the womb of my mother, it wasn't a question of, was I going to college? And this is true. I obviously was there, but in my mother's womb, but my mother, it wasn't a question of, was I going to college? The question was, where am I going to college? Today, for most Jewish families, it's not a question of where, of you going to graduate school or law school or medical school. The question is where. In other words, the expectations within Judaism for higher education are just about a slam dunk. That's why, with less than 1% of the population in the United States being Jewish, 3% of the college campuses around the country are Jewish. Now think about that. There's less than 1% of all Americans are Jewish, and yet you go on a college campus, and the average for all of them is 3%. That means the overwhelming majority of Jewish children go to college. It's almost 100%. Not quite, but almost. Question?
Do the Jewish children, when they get out of college, they have a lot of debt, or?
If we're talking in America, it just depends. Some of them would, some of them wouldn't. I think another way to ask the question is, what percentage of Jewish kids are in college whose parents pay for their education? I don't have a statistic on that, but the answer is, when you look in college campuses around the country, Jewish students are in very expensive schools. Ivy League schools, schools in the Midwest, that some of the, for instance, in Illinois, Bradley University, a lot of East Coast Jewish people go there. Wash U in Missouri, in St. Louis, a very small school, but very prestigious. It's not an Ivy League school, but a lot of kids who don't get into the Ivy League schools go there, and these are expensive schools. So I can't tell you what the percentage is, but I can tell you that many Jewish parents are the ones that provide. But again, I'm not sure. I think that's an American thing rather than just a Jewish thing. But the emphasis has always been within Judaism of learning, of an education. That's why it's interesting, Jewish people, professionally speaking, high percentage of Jewish people are doctors, lawyers, accountants, salesmen, social workers. They are usually involved in people professions. You will find them as engineers and tech people, but not nearly the percentages. Usually, again, general rule, less social interaction, less Jewish people. You don't find in America a lot of Jewish farmers. So we're in Iowa. Are there Jewish people living in Iowa? Yes. Usually those people are ones involved in the support of the farming community. They own businesses. They were accountants. Even some veterinarians to support the farm. Now, if you go to Israel, farming that's how the country was established, and there were many educated Jewish people who made Aliyah to Israel and went into agriculture. But as a rule in the United States, when you're not involved with people, there's not a lot of Jewish people there. Businesses that are involved with people, there's a large portion who are. So again, not a hard, fast rule, but a generalization that I think is fair. Amongst Orthodox or observant Jews, Cheder is an all-day school. It's an all-day school. We would call it a parochial school, or in our context, a Christian school. For those of you who went to a Christian school, you understand that your parents sent you there. Why? Well, yes, you learned math and reading and all those things, but you probably had chapel. You probably had Bible time to study the Bible. Cheder is the same thing. It's school, but there's going to be emphasis on Jewish prayer, learning about holidays, learning the liturgy, etc. Yeshiva is the high school, Jewish high school. They have Sunday school. They have Shabbat school. Orthodox Jews would not be involved in Shabbat school because you're not allowed to write. So that would be conservative and reform who would be in a Sabbath school instead of Sunday school.